Welcome to Radio English, the podcast that will help you improve your English level. Listen to live recorded English radio broadcasts, stories, politics, sports, breaking news, and more in 30 minutes. Let's get started and enjoy the journey. This is Radio English.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy and helping clients find balance. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists for online therapy from anywhere at betterhelp.com/public. From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
Support for KUER comes from the University of Utah's College of Social Work's Substance Use Disorder Counselor Training Program with a new paid apprenticeship option. Information at socialwork.utah.edu/SUDC.
Spring Bar, canvas camping tents made for the enjoyment of Utah's wild places. Located at 4026 Southwest Temple and springbar.com.
The Indian film All We Imagine Is Light has won acclaim at festivals around the world, and yet it was snubbed at home.
I don't know how we can define what is Indian and what is not, but the actors are Indian. The entire crew was Indian.
I'm Juana Summers. That story on the next All Things Considered from NPR News.
Stay with us on KUER for All Things Considered, coming up at 4.
KUER just wrapped our year-end fund drive, and we are very grateful to everyone who supported us in the 2024 draw to a close era. Because of your generosity, we can start the new year with confidence, and if you didn't get a chance to donate, of course, it's not too late. Your donation will still help us with our year-end goals. Just head over to KUER.org to make your gift, and thank you. I'm Bob Nelson. This is 90.1 KUER Salt Lake City, NPR Utah, also at KUQU Enoch, KUHU Monticello, KUOU Roosevelt, KUXU Monroe, KUEU Logan. It's 12 noon.
The New York City Police Department has a tool developed with Microsoft that utilizes the largest network of cameras, license plate readers, and radiological sensors in the world.
If the government wanted to find out information about us, what could it do without getting a warrant? When you go to Whole Foods and you try to check out, it takes a picture of you for some reason, that would allow them to see where you shop, maybe what kind of religious service you may have attended because there's a camera outside the house of worship. The NYPD's DAT is slightly different, but built on the same idea, on the theory that that's going to help them either investigate or prevent crime.
Nevertheless, the United Healthcare CEO's alleged killer wasn't arrested because of that mass surveillance network, but because of an observant McDonald's worker. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. Today on Point, American law enforcement and the limits of mass surveillance. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Investigators are on the scene of a mass shooting at a private school in Madison, Wisconsin. Moments ago, police confirmed at least 5 people are dead and at least 5 others are injured this morning at Abundant Life Christian School. Police Chief Sean Barnes says the suspected shooter is among the dead and was believed to be a minor.
We believe the shooter was a student at the school.
Chief Barnes declined to disclose whether the victims were students and or faculty members, pending notification of next of kin. Barnes noted that out of an abundance of caution, investigators are still doing another sweep of the school and nearby vehicles with the help of bomb-sniffing dogs. As a father and a former teacher, Barnes says his heart is heavy. He reflected on the gravity of his community's loss, especially so close to Christmas.
We have to come together as a community and figure out what happened here and make sure that it doesn't happen in any other place that should be a refuge for students in our community.
Barnes noted that medics who were initially in training a few miles away ended up applying their training in real time.
Administration over sales of portions of the border wall. Franco Ordonez, NPR News, Palm Beach, Florida.
A mass rape trial in the south of France has concluded, and the verdict is expected later this week. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley is covering that story.
Gisèle Pellicot walked out of the courtroom Monday to applause. She's become a hero in France for insisting that the trial of her husband and 50 other men be open to the public and media. Each of the men risks up to 20 years, the maximum sentence for aggravated rape in France. But many testified they did not consider they'd raped her because Pellicot's husband invited them and told them she was complicit. In his last statement to the court before the verdict, ex-husband Dominique Pellicot hailed the courage of his ex-wife and apologized for making her and his family suffer. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Avignon, France.
The Dow is down 31 points at last check. This is NPR News. The Federal Reserve is widely expected to cut interest rates when policymakers meet this week. NPR's Scott Horsley reports there's less certainty about what will happen to borrowing costs in 2025.
Fed policymakers hold their last meeting of the year this week. Another quarter-point cut in interest rates is considered a near certainty, but investors will be listening to what Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and his colleagues have to say about next year. On average, members of the Fed's rate-setting committee were projecting back in September that rates would drop by another full percentage point in 2025. Those future rate cuts could be scaled back, however, if inflation turns out to be more stubborn than expected. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
The Food and Drug Administration has been reviewing a petition to ban a petroleum-based food dye called Red No. 3. NPR's Allison Aubrey reports a decision could come soon.
Red Dye 3 has been used for more than 50 years to give foods and drinks bright, flashy coloring. Back in 1990, the FDA banned it from cosmetics after lab studies show it could cause cancer in animals at high doses. And last year, the state of California passed a law to ban the use of Red 3 in food. Researchers found evidence that synthetic food dyes may exacerbate behavior problems in children. Thomas Galligan of the Center for Science in the Public Interest, which filed the petition, says there's no reason to add synthetic dyes to food.
It's just there to make food look visually appealing so that consumers want to spend their money on it.
He points out Red 3 has been banned or severely restricted in many countries, including Australia, Japan, and the European Union. Allison Aubrey, NPR News.
The Nasdaq is up more than 1%, and the S&P has risen nearly 0.5%. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. This is NPR.
90.1 KUER weather forecast. Salt Lake City, Wasatch Front, a little cloudy, chance of rain and snow later on today with daytime highs in the mid and upper 40s. Around freezing overnight, rain and snow mixing at times tomorrow, rain decreasing by later in the day. Partly sunny, highs mid-40s tomorrow. It's cloudy, 42 now in Salt Lake City, Ogden 41, 35 in Vernal, 31 in Heber City. St. George a little hazy, but sunny, 43 degrees. This is KUER.
This is On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. When United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was gunned down in New York City on December 4th, security cameras caught the entire murderous act as it happened. That footage was subsequently released by the New York Police Department. The shooter, wearing a hoodie, mask, and backpack, steps out from behind a parked car, calmly points his gun at Thompson's back, and shoots twice. As you know, since then, law enforcement officials identified 26-year-old Luigi Mangione as the alleged killer and arrested him in Pennsylvania. But that initial security camera footage isn't the only surveillance NYPD has of the shooter. Late last week, police released new information on how they believe he got out of New York City.
Investigators believe Luigi Mangione rode a bike through Central Park after allegedly killing Brian Thompson, then took a cab to a major bus terminal in Upper Manhattan just to go back downtown, possibly taking the subway to New York's Penn Station. From there, investigators question whether Mangione fled to Pennsylvania by train.
That report from CBS News' Jared Hill. And what's interesting about the report is that each stop Hill identifies, that bike, the taxi cab, Penn Station, are all accompanied by surveillance images of Mangione. Which makes perfect sense because New York City is one of the most surveilled cities on the planet. In fact, here's how NYPD describes a part of their surveillance system themselves. Quote, "The New York City Police Department has a tool developed with Microsoft that utilizes the largest networks of cameras, license plate readers, and radiological sensors in the world, end quote. And yet somehow, even with that tech dragnet, always on and always watching, Mangione somehow managed to make it to Altoona, Pennsylvania, and wasn't arrested until a sharp-eyed McDonald's customer saw him, told a worker, and that worker called 911, all of which happened 5 days after Thompson's murder. So what is the purpose of all that mass surveillance in New York? What are its advantages? When does it work? What are its limitations, as shown by that 5-day manhunt for Luigi Mangione? Well, Faiza Patel joins us now. She's Senior Director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Faiza Patel, welcome to On Point.
Hi, Meghna. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, can you bring me up to speed insofar as what you think is pertinent or most salient in terms of the information NYPD says it gathered on Mangione through surveillance over the past week or so?
I think what's really salient here is for people to understand that technology is not magic. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and that there is a very large human element in how technology is used and how well it operates in particular circumstances. So let's take the case of the images of Luigi Mangione that have been circulating across the media. You have a photograph from Starbucks. You have a photograph from when he's in and out of a taxi cab. You have a photograph from a hostel, and then you have a number of these kind of blurred images, which seem to be taken from street cameras, likely NYPD cameras. So you have a great deal of variation in the kinds of photographs that are available of Mangione. And if you compare those photos to, for example, how you take a photograph of an individual, right? If you're taking a picture, you take a picture head on, right? You're not sometimes you take it from the side, but normally you're trying to get a person's sort of full face in it. These images are not that, right? And that, I think, brings us to kind of one of the first limitations of facial recognition technology, which is what is, the sort of way in which the police will identify an unknown suspect, right? So here they would take the photographs and they would run them through the NYPD's database, which has, I think, it has several million images in it, and those are arrest photos and parole photos. Now you've got sort of two fault points here, right? So one is the image quality good enough to be able to match with the database or the library? The second qualifier is, does the library have this guy's photo in it? And if he hasn't been arrested in New York and he hasn't been on parole, it's not going to have that photo, so they're not going to get a match. That's not the only option, though, that the police have. They have two other options. So one is, at least in around 2018, 2019, that time frame, the NYPD was testing a contract with Clearview AI, which you may remember is a well-known company who has come under fire and has been fined and even banned in several countries, which scrapes images from the internet, just anybody's images, yours, mine, people who are completely private figures, and has created a database of what it says are 50 billion images. That's a huge amount of images, right? So at least at one point, NYPD could have run his image through Clearview AI's database. Another option that the NYPD has is that it can run, it can request the FBI. So the FBI has a very, very large database of images taken from driver's licenses, all kinds of sources. And as of 2019, which was the last number I've seen, they had something like 640 million images. Still not Clearview AI, but it is a pretty big database. So those are like the three options that the NYPD can do. So
okay.
If this,
can I just jump in here for a second? Because I want to be able to sort of very surgically go through each of these options as you lay them out for us. But before I do that, I want to be clear to listeners that we did definitely reach out to the New York City Police Department to see if someone could speak with us or if they could make a if they had a comment or a statement to make regarding the issues that we're raising in this hour. NYPD did not respond to our requests, which they had, but they did not. So first of all, Faiza, let me just back up here for a second, because the very first thing that you said is quite important, that technology does not equal magic, right? And the reason why I think this is so fascinating to learn about in, concrete detail is that I think the general public has been habituated into thinking that technology, especially while law enforcement uses it, is a kind of magic, right? Because I was literally recalling an episode of Law and Order SUV from like 15 years ago, where there was a terrible crime committed, but they all gathered around a computer. They had like one license plate and a face, and through some like magic system, they were able to trace a credit card, and then that credit card was connected to a Metro card, and then that Metro card was pinging in different places, and then of course the credit card was also linked to a tolling mechanism in the suspect's car, and like within like half a day they caught the person. Now that's Hollywood, but I think a lot of people do feel like it should be that fast, which is why this 5-day lag in arresting Mangione, and that only coming after somebody, an actual just human, recognized him, seems to call into question, like, well, what good is all of this surveillance if ultimately at the end you rely on an upstanding citizen to say, I think that guy is the guy I saw on TV.
Right. I mean, I think that's sort of the third piece of this too, right? You have to identify someone, but then you also have to find them, right? And if somebody is, clever and doesn't use their credit card and doesn't drive a car, whose license plate you could recognize, but rather, uses public transport, or in this case, I guess a cab and some kind of public transport. And you can still pay in cash in most of these places. So there are ways to kind of avoid being found. So I think that's also a piece of it, right? There's the image, there's the whether or not you have a digital image that matches that image. And then there's the, even if you identify the individual, to actually locate the individual. So those are like 3 separate phases. And each of those has fault points. And I think we've seen those, at least it seems from the outside, that we've seen those kind of play out in this story as well.
Do you think that those fault points, now as laid bare, as you're saying, with the Mangione case, call into question how much money is going into this kind of very high-tech law enforcement surveillance?
I think the efficacy of the systems that the NYPD and other police departments have in place has never been properly tested, right? So you do hear, and I feel like this has to be true, that, facial recognition has helped the NYPD and other police departments and the FBI investigate crimes and even apprehend suspects. At the same time, the question is, well, what is the cost of this technology? And to tell you the truth, we don't know how much the NYPD spends on these technologies, right? The NYPD's budget is notoriously opaque. So it's not that you can sort of draw out and say, well, in 2022, the NYPD spent X $100 million on surveillance technology. You don't have that kind of granular information available from the NYPD. You also have only very limited transparency from the police department about its surveillance technology. Now, in 2021, the New York City Council passed a law called the POST Act, which requires the NYPD to make annual disclosures about its surveillance technologies and to include also impact statements about, who is this technology most affecting? Because one of the big concerns around many surveillance technologies, including facial recognition, is this issue of bias, right? I mean, there's been a concern that, it has been documented that facial recognition algorithms tend to work better on white or Caucasian faces and on men than they do on people of color, and particularly black people. So, if you look at the wrongful arrests that have been made based on facial recognition technology over the last couple of years, which have received a lot of media coverage, there have been 6 arrests that have been reported, and all 6 of them are black.
Yeah.
So you also have this racial dimension playing into it.
So Faiza Patel, hang on for just a moment. When we come back, what I want to do is take a deep dive into each of the known technologies that you went through that NYPD either has currently or has had at one time. So that's what we'll do in just a moment. This is On Point.
And this is 90.1 KUER, NPR Utah, 1219.
Support for KUER comes from Roseman University of Health Sciences, offering an accelerated PharmD program that prepares graduates for a variety of pharmacy careers. Information at roseman.edu.
FFKR Architects, featuring a pre-K through 12 studio focusing on human-centered learning to create spaces to foster education and equity and develop competencies. Designers of Hillcrest High School, ffkr.com.
Education funding is making headlines across Utah. KUER News recently reported on a new law eliminating school fees, but some worry that might have unintended problems for programs like the arts.
By taking away all fees, districts will be forced to make tough choices, and that might limit the variety and the richness that we're able to offer to our students right now.
Listen for the latest education stories from KUER News, weekdays during Morning Edition and All Things Considered on KUER.
Support for On Point comes from Seed. Seed's DS-01 is a 24-strain, 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic, engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public. And MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
You're back with On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, and today Faiza Patel joins us. She's Senior Director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. And we're talking about the vast surveillance system or systems that are in place in New York City, run by the New York City Police Department, and their efficacy and their limits, as shown by the 5-day-long manhunt for Luigi Mangione. By the way, here's a little summation of the route that that alleged killer Mangione took on the morning of December 4th, when United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was murdered. This is a route as compiled by security images obtained by CNN.
At 6:17 a.m., police say a camera at a nearby Starbucks shows the suspect buying a bottle of water and 2 energy bars.
2 minutes after that, at 6:19, a surveillance camera near a deli on West 55th Street appears to show the suspect walking and briefly stopping at a pile of trash. 11 minutes later, 6:30 a.m., surveillance cameras pick up what appears to be the gunman on the phone. You can see a potential witness walking right behind him. 6:44 a.m., the tragic moment. United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson leaves his hotel and crosses the street. He walks towards the Hilton Midtown. You can see the suspect wearing a backpack walk up right behind him. Police say the gunman shot Thompson in the back and leg. Then seconds later, the suspect crossed the street and went through an alleyway between 54th and 55th Streets. Police say he then got an electric bike and headed north on 6th Avenue. 4 minutes later, police say a camera spots a person believed to be the suspect riding an electric bike in Central Park. 12 minutes later, 7 a.m., about 30 blocks away from a Nest camera, more video of what appears to show the suspect riding on West 85th Street, but now without the backpack.
Once again, that's from CNN, from the security camera footage on the day of the murder. Okay, so let's go back in time, though, because Faiza, as you said, there's been quite a bit of development and installation of lots of different kinds of mass surveillance systems in New York City. There's one that you had specifically mentioned, and it back in 2012. So here's a bit of tape from it. This is August 8th, 2012. Then Mayor Michael Bloomberg announces the launch of a new, quote, real-time crime prevention and counterterrorism technology solution.
Today, we're announcing the full launch of the Domain Awareness System. This new system capitalizes on new powerful policing software that allows police officers and other personnel to more quickly access relevant information gathered from existing technology and help them respond even more effectively. In other words, we're finding new ways to leverage already existing cameras, crime data, and other tools to support the work of our investigators, making it easier for them to determine if a crime is part of an ongoing pattern. And it will allow the NYPD to better deploy its officers.
Then Mayor Michael Bloomberg in 2012 touting the Domain Awareness System, which I understand at that time cost NYPD $40 million. So, Faiza, you said a little bit about it. Tell us more. What exactly is the Domain Awareness System? Who did NYPD contract with or partner with to install it? What was its intended use case?
So the Domain Awareness System was developed in conjunction with Microsoft, I believe. And what it does is that it pulls in different kinds of information, right? So it's going to pull in arrest data. It's going to pull in summons data. It's going to pull in warrants, outstanding warrants. And then also if somebody calls in, say, to 911, right, those reports will be pulled in. It will pull in the location of those calls sometimes. And then it will also pull in for individuals, any license plate information, right? So if you're caught going through one of the bridges or tunnels that you have to pay, any associated address information, phone number, date of birth, whether or not you have a gun permit. So all of this kind of information is pulled together. Now, the theory here is that when you pull all this information together, you're going to be able to do sort of two things, right? So one is, and the camera feeds, of course, which is kind of critical to this, right? This all started with sort of in downtown Manhattan after the 9/11 attacks, when a network of cameras, mainly in sort of private businesses, etc., was fed into the NYPD's DAS system. So you have all of this information coming in, and the theory is that this can be used to do two things. So one is that it can be used to prevent terrorism. So presumably if an NYPD officer is monitoring the system and he or she sees something that causes alarm bells to go off, they can then pull in additional data if they can identify the individual who's doing something of concern, and quickly, sort of find out who they are and what they've been up to if they're in the system, right? The second thing that it's supposed to do is to help solve crimes. So the idea being that, if you have, if you have a potential suspect, say you have a photograph, for example, right, that you could then, if you can come up with that person's identity, or you can sort of correlate them with crime complaints, etc. So the idea is that all of this data is going to help you solve crimes, when you don't know who's, carried out the crime or the suspected crime. So that's sort of the theory of this. In this case,
can we just pause there? Yeah. Or maybe you were about to answer the question I'm going to ask. Because, so critically you're saying, in theory, that is how the domain awareness system is supposed to work, right? Just to underscore, and to be sure I heard you correctly, to help solve crimes when you're not exactly sure who did it. Is that right? Yeah, okay, good.
That's how I haven't seen it in operation, so it's actually unfortunate that the NYPD didn't send somebody, because they could probably explain it better than I could, because I'm looking at documents and reports.
100%. Once again, they just simply did not, again, for total transparency, to listeners, NYPD did not respond to our requests. But so in this case, though, I guess where I was going is you had said earlier that the efficacy of these systems has never properly been tested even.
Well, so I think when you look at efficacy, right, it is a very complicated issue, right?
Yeah.
How do you test efficacy? So the place where, system efficacy has been most tested has been with facial recognition software, right? So the National Institute of Science and Technology, which sits in the Commerce Department and is sort of the premier testing place in the United States, has conducted a number of tests of facial recognition technology. Starting, I think they did a big report in 2013. They did another one in 2019 and then did some follow-ups in 2022 and then in 2024. And what that has showed systematically, particularly between 2013 and 2019, that facial recognition technology has improved dramatically, right? So that the kinds of error rates that you're looking for the best algorithms, right, for the best tool on the market are, below 1 or 2%. So it has become more and more accurate over time. At the same time, it has to be, you have to acknowledge, the limits of the kind of testing that NIST performs, right? So for one thing, it's voluntary testing, right? So you decide as a company whether you want your algorithm to be tested. And the system that NYPD reportedly uses, which is something called DataWorks, I believe, was not among the list of tested systems. So we cannot tell you, sitting here, does the NYPD have a state-of-the-art facial recognition system or does it not, right? There's a huge variation in vendors as to accuracy.
Yeah. I mean, and
so I think that's one thing.
On that point, one of the reasons why we don't know, and this is where I want to talk with you about the Post Act, right, is according to the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project that definitely looks very, very closely at surveillance, electronic surveillance, specifically in New York. They're New York-based. They gathered a lot of FOIA data, essentially, and say that NYPD, up until 2020, purchased nearly $3 billion in secret surveillance equipment that they say had been previously hidden from the public because NYPD were filing those expenses under or those purchases under a quote special expenses program, which avoided scrutiny. And that was one of the things changed by the Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology Act?
No, I don't think the Post Act does not look at financial disclosures. The Post Act is a kind of basic transparency measure that says, tell us what technology you're using, tell us what your standards are, tell us what rules you have in place to make sure the technology isn't abused, and tell us it also actually does require efficacy, but I don't think the NYPD has ever really provided answers on that. And impact, right? Like, who is it impacting? Because racial bias is a huge concern when it comes to surveillance technology, just as it is with policing generally.
Okay. Well, so then in that case, the Post Act is asking for a certain amount of oversight, but to be clear, you're saying that NYPD is simply not complying with that?
Well, I think two things are happening, right? So the NYPD it's putting out its post-act required statements, etc., but the statements themselves are often inadequate, right? And they're not sufficient to allow any kind of real oversight of this technology. So the NYPD Inspector General, for example, I think this was last year, did an audit, and they found that, really the NYPD was not providing the kind of data that they needed in order to evaluate its use of technology. So you have a huge transparency gap over here. Now, when the Post Act was being passed, I remember the NYPD, I don't think it was the police commissioner, it was their chief of counterterrorism, I believe, went on MSNBC and said, well, with this Post Act, you're just going to give terrorists the tools they need to avoid surveillance, which is kind of a joke because, the amount of transparency we're getting out of the NYPD based on the Post Act is quite limited. We have an overview of what kinds of, roughly the technology they use. And I have to say, there's some important things in there. But, with technology, the devil is in the details, as we were talking about with facial recognition, right? It all sounds so easy when you see it on TV, but the reality is much more messy. And so without having a better understanding of exactly what technology, for example, the NYPD uses in a particular scenario, it is difficult to evaluate either its efficacy or, whether the PD has enough safeguards in place to prevent its abuse, and 3, what its racial impact is. So all of these things really do come down to digging into the details of the technology.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. This is On Point. Now, Faiza, you've actually pointed out something which is extremely important, and that is New York City, right? It's one of the most vibrant, biggest, most active diverse cities in the world, right? And it was also the target of the worst terrorist act on U.S. soil in American history, right? So counterterrorism is a major part also of what the NYPD has to to work on to prevent terrorist attacks. And to that effect, I understand that a lot of this technology that's being used was, for example, some of it was developed for Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, so I wonder if there's an argument to be made that these technologies have been tested for efficacy, just not on U.S. soil.
So I think that I would make the opposite point, actually, which is that, technology that may be appropriate for a battlefield is not appropriate for an American city. And that's because the standards generally in a battlefield are...
Thank you for tuning in to Radio English. I hope you found this podcast really helpful. Don't forget to leave a like below and follow me on Spotify and TikTok. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode of Radio English.